to Woman Space's Focus on Women. I am Florence Rapoport, Director Emerita of Woman Space, which is, as you probably know, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to serving the needs of today's women, whatever those needs may be. We do things educational, we do things social, we do things cultural, and we do things supportive. Your participation in any or all of those things is hereby invited. This program, Focus on Women, is presenting conversations with women of interest, women famous and not so famous, all women with something to say. If you or someone you know has something special that you think might be of interest to us, we would be happy to hear from you. You can reach me, Florence Rapoport, care of Woman Space, 3 St. Paul's Place, Great Neck, New York, 11021. And that brings us to tonight's event, a very special, sensational, impressive, wonderful event, cocktail reception honoring Shirley Romaine. To say a word or two about that, I have 2 guests sitting with me. First, Sylvia Bleiweiss. Sylvia Bleiweiss, coordinator of the Arts Festival, whose vision, dedication, and direction created the Festival '88, and whose participation has been very meaningful for all of us. Sylvia, we talked at the opening of the art exhibit last week, which was very wonderful, and we're talking again now at the second part of your exciting program. I'd like you to say a little bit about how the event honoring Shirley Romaine came to pass.
When we planned the Arts Festival, we decided we would like to give recognition to a woman in our community who has contributed greatly to the cultural life of the community. In committee, we unanimously decided the person to honor was Shirley Romaine because of her participation and contribution to so many facets of the cultural and artistic life of our community. We're very pleased tonight that we have this wonderful setting in the Nassau County Museum of Fine Art, which is such a pleasant and enjoyable place to be. We also want to mention the fact that Shirley not only contributed to the community in all the aspects, but also particularly to Woman Space, giving much of her valuable time to entertaining and educating us in her own inimitable way.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. That was a wonderful explanation of Shirley's place in our hearts and in this function tonight. Now next to me is Beth Rosenbaum. Beth is coordinator of special events for the Woman Space Arts Festival '88. She is herself an accomplished sculptor and who has exhibited widely and whose work, called Isadora, is currently on display in the Women View Women art exhibit at the Bayview Avenue Great Neck Library. Beth, as coordinator of special events, you've had a very significant hand in the wonderful things that are happening in this arts festival. Would you tell our audience a little bit about those events, and make sure to mention places and dates so they will not miss any of them?
Well, we are worked very hard to get 2 very special people and 2 very special events as part of this festival. One is going to be Laura Israel. She is a student of folk art, and it is so important to know the role of women in expressing themselves in artistic fashions through all the period. These are women who have not necessarily been recognized as artists, but their art is in the form of their crafts. So she's going to do a program on quilting and on women in folk art. This is going to be held at the library on October 20th, and it will be at 8 o'clock at night, and you're certainly all welcome. The second will be a program that's going to be done in cooperation with the North Shore Community Arts Center. Now we have a art historian and a curator, Constance Schwartz, who's going to have a program on Louise Nevelson and Georgia O'Keeffe. How could I forget it? Georgia O'Keeffe, who is so contemporary, although she's no longer with us. There will be a slide presentation. This will be held at the Woman Space headquarters at 3 St. Paul's Place on November 1st. And again, we hope you all join us for that event.
Thank you very much, Beth. And now I think I see Shirley herself arriving. Perhaps we can get to exchange a few words with her.
This is so nice. Hello, Florence.
Shirley, welcome.
Thank you. What a day. What a day.
Shirley, first, of course, greetings and congratulations on this singular honor. I mean, for a woman to be honored by women in this fashion is a very exciting thing indeed. Let me share with our audience a little bit about you and your work so they know of whom we speak. Shirley Blank Romaine, actress, teacher, and TV talk show host, began her acting career with the legendary Luntz in The Great Sebastians. She has since appeared extensively on and off Broadway and on tour. Featured on both daytime and primetime television, she currently produces and hosts Artscene on Long Island for Cablevision TV, which is doing this program for us tonight. She is also the creator-performer of Literature as Theater, a series of programs that she has performed across the country, on Long Island, in the metropolitan area, and even on the high seas aboard the QE2. Her acting career, her teaching prowess, her dramatic readings, all successfully accomplished while she was wife to Stanley Romaine and mother to Erica and Jenny. These all will be the subject of our talk tonight. Shirley,
Yes.
your education was in theater and art, was it not?
Yes.
Tell us.
Yes. Well, I grew up and went to school in California, in Southern California, and I was really always very interested, I think, in the theater, improvised things. And finally, I went to Los Angeles City College, which had a really wonderful, wonderful theater department. And then I did some work at UCLA. And then it was a whole series of circumstances. I was doing a play at the Pasadena Playhouse, and somebody saw me and came back and said, "How would you like to appear in summer stock in the East?" And I said, "I would love it." And I had a job, and so I came, and I was in a place near Plymouth, Massachusetts. And so it got me to New York. From there, I went to New York.
And getting to New York was a very major step in your life, right? Because then from New York, the leap was onto Broadway. Tell us about that, Shirley.
Well, I had worked in radio in Los Angeles, so that was the first thing that really got me going and made it possible for me to pay my rent and, do those things. And then I, made rounds, did all of the things, and did some then off-Broadway things, and auditioned for and got a part in The Great Sebastians with Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontanne.
Imagine having appeared in a show with Alfred.
Well, it was as wonderful as you were indicating, because they were great, great theater people, not just wonderful actors, each in their own way. He was superb, and she was wonderful in another way, and they were very. We got to be friendly because, as part of the Great Sebastians, they were mind readers.
Uh-huh.
And since I appeared in the second act, they needed somebody to kind of go out and sit in the audience and kind of case the audience for things that they could mind read about. So I was that person.
Oh, so you were not only performing with them, but sharing
That's
their
right.
job.
So
maybe we can share this mic. The way we share
Okay.
That.
Oh,
That'd be better. I think that's good. Well, I just wanted to know about them personally that way, because I remember seeing them more than once and feeling what a remarkable pair they were. And then that wasn't all in your list of famous colleagues. John Gielgud, tell us about him a little bit.
Well, I acted with Uta Hagen on the tour of Streetcar Named Desire.
Good.
And then I was in a production of Much Ado About Nothing with John Gielgud and Margaret Leighton, two other superb actors. So it really, for a young actress, it was a very good experience.
And then you got some soap opera work, right? I wish I had seen you on the soap operas. That must have been interesting. Tell us about that as a career.
Well, I did a lot of television in New York, a lot of the big, nighttime shows. I particularly remember Omnibus, which was a very big and wonderful show when it started, and a lot of the early shows that were done. And then I was on Love of Life for a couple of years. I was on Edge of Night for a long time. I was on As the World Turns. So I was on all of those shows.
All right, Shirley, now somewhere in there you met and married Stanley Romaine, right? You lived in the city then with him for a while. Tell us about having the daughters and how that impinged on your career and what the women's movement meant in your developing dual personality of mother and actress.
Okay, I'll compress it as best I can. I met Stan when I came back from the tour of the Great Sebastians. He'd just been to Austria and Switzerland skiing, and I'd just come back from this tour, and we were introduced by some mutual friends. And it took, we decided in pretty short order that we would get married.
The chemistry worked.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's fair to say.
Chemistry is a good guy.
Yeah, and then we have 2 daughters who were born 3 years apart. We lived in the city, and when they really were getting ready to go to school, I think when our older daughter was thinking about going to junior high school, we really thought that maybe the city wasn't the best place. We believed in public education, and we really thought maybe it would be a good idea to move someplace where they could get a good education in public schools. So
off to Great Neck you came. I think that's what brought all of us to Great Neck, right? The good schools. So then you were here, and New York was a little bit there, and you were faced with some dilemma there, which you solved in an incredibly creative way.
Well,
talk about that, not modestly. Tell it straight, okay. Shirley.
I'll tell it straight. I must say that when the kids were little, I still did do a lot of work. I was in a wonderful off-Broadway play called The White Rose and the Red, which was Shakespeare's 3 Henry IVs and Richard III. And then I also continued when we moved here to do soap opera. I mean, I was on Love of Life, and sometimes the kids would come in with their friends, and it was really fun. And then I don't know, as they were growing older, I think the routine of calling agents and looking for work and doing all of that just got to be a little wearying. I thought there must be something better than this. And while I still, if people called me, I did some commercials, I did a variety of things, I just thought there really must be some way that I can do something myself. Now, see, the women's movement was happening then, and there was a lot of ferment, and I think people were thinking about doing that. So I took some time. I took a good long hunk of time to think about what I could do, what I was good at doing, what I liked doing. And I had always loved literature. I'd gone back to Queens College and taken some courses in contemporary literature and contemporary poets, so that, kind of riched up the mixture.
Bit, yeah.
And I said, why don't I use something using the literature and myself as a performer and maybe work something out. So I did the first one, and I went to Joe Covino, who was then the director of the Great Neck Library, and I proposed the idea to him, and he said, well, let's try one. And we did it. I tried it, and the response was really very good. And from then on, I've been doing, at least 2 a year.
I want to talk a little more about them, but I do want to interpose my own experience of them. I didn't know you at all when I went to see the first one, which was women-focused, and poetry and some stories that I hadn't even known. And you did them so beautifully. It was like, it was a revelation to me. And to see all those people in the audience, and here was a woman in the community doing this splendid thing. And so that was at the very start of it. It is now, of course, mushroomed into a big and wonderful, recognized package. Okay, now tell us where else you've done them, Shirley.
Well, I do two here. I should say that each of the programs is comprised of prose and poetry centered around a specific theme. And I've done them, in many libraries and colleges and art centers, and of course this summer in Martha's Vineyard, last summer as well, and last summer in this aboard the QE2, going over and back, which is really very nice.
What a treat for the travelers, right?
It really is wonderful. And then I've been to, for various groups, I've been to Monaco, I've been to Maui, I've done it in San Francisco and Chicago and Kansas City, many places. And it's always exciting, to get the response.
So you have the very special satisfaction of knowing that you not only are doing it, but you made it happen. I mean, it was like a genuinely creative thing, Shirley. Now, one other thing I want you to talk about, and we don't have a lot of time, but another way in which you contributed to my life, namely the adult ed course you give called theater in performance. I heard Bob Sholaton, the director of the Adult Ed program, say that you were one of the superstars whose draw is unabated as the years go. People just rush to your classes. Talk about that very quickly, Shirley.
Very quickly. Okay, it's a wonderful course, and I have marvelous students. We meet in Great Neck one week, and we go to the theater the next, and we meet afterward with the actors or the director or the performer, and then we come back to Great Neck and talk about it. And it's really, it's very enjoyable, because when we come back, we really talk in depth about the plays, and I think we all learn a lot, and I can't say enough about the wonderful people who are in my class. They recharge me, and that's very good.
I was one of those people a lot of times, Shirley. In fact, I regret my being busy myself to the degree that I sometimes cannot take the course, but I did love it. Okay, one other thing I think needs comment, and that is the way you have responded to Woman's Space. I mean, 9 years ago, Woman's Space came into being. Wonderful things started to happen. A new sense of sisterhood was abroad in the land. And your response to our requests for a performance, an attendance, a lecture, a demonstration was always yes. It was like sisterhood at its best. You want to say how you feel about Woman's Space?
Well, I think you've said it all. I mean, I feel very much a part of Woman's Space. There aren't enough hours in the day for me to participate on a full-time basis. I can't tell you how honored I am to have them honor me in this event, but I feel very sisterly. I'm very connected. If you know the material that I do, I couldn't be more simpatico to what Woman's Space is all about, and I think I'm I am we. What is that thing from Member of the Wedding? We are me, and I am we. I mean, I think we're in it together.
We are in it together.
That's how I feel.
Well, we are in it together, and tonight's reception, honoring you, Shirley, sort of solidifies the importance of the feeling that exists and has existed, lo, these many years, between you, Shirley Blank Romaine, art purveyor, art inspirer, wonderful actress. It's been our real pleasure to have you so connected to Woman's Space. And tonight is the reception in honor of Shirley Blank Romaine, and in about 1 minute we will be continuing with this reception in which Shirley Blank Romaine will be honored. Thank you for being with us, and do attend the ceremonies as they begin now.
Good evening. I'm Dana Lehman, Director of Woman's Space, and it is a great pleasure to share this tribute to Shirley with all of you. We in Woman's Space always thought of Shirley as our treasure, but judging by the people here, I think everybody in the North Shore shares our feelings. Woman's Space is, as most of you know, a woman's center created to meet the needs of all women.
Good evening this evening. and welcome to Woman Space's Focus on Women. I am Florence Rapoport, Director Emerita of Woman Space, which is, as you probably know, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to serving the needs of today's women, whatever those needs may be. This program, Focus on Women, is presenting conversations with women of interest, women famous and not so famous, women of high achievement, women of special circumstances or special problems, women in the workforce, or women at home, but all women with something to say. If you or someone you know has something special that you think would be of interest to our audience, I would be happy to hear from you. You can reach me, Florence Rapoport, care of Woman Space, 3 St. Paul's Place, Great Neck, New York, 11021. And that brings us to tonight's guest, Eunice Lipton, author of the new and critically acclaimed book, Alias Olympia, an unconventional narrative that is at once a memoir and a compelling detective story. With her PhD in art history from the Institute of Fine Arts of New York University, Ms. Lipton is a distinguished art historian and was for over 20 years a teacher at Williams College, SUNY Binghamton, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and Hunter College. I couldn't wait to get to Hunter College, my alma mater, I might point out. She has written and lectured widely and authored 2 books of art criticism. First, Picasso Criticism, 1901 to 1939, subtitle, The Making of an Artist Hero. And second, looking into Degas, subtitle, Uneasy Images of Women and Modern Life. Her new book, Alias Olympia, has been described as being on the cutting edge of contemporary trends in biography. And Deirdre Baer, whom regular viewers will remember as a guest on this program when her book, The Definitive Biography of Simone de Beauvoir, was published some years back, said of Alias Olympia, and I quote, Eunice Lipton has written a stunning book, which represents a new achievement in biography, melding as it does autobiography and art history. And I loved what Vivian Gornick, who also sat in that seat when her memoir, Fierce Attachments, was published, she said, quote, this book has made something vivid and beautiful out of the search in research. That's a very telling observation. It is with great pride and high expectations that I welcome Eunice Lipton, author.
Thank you. It's just wonderful to be here, Florence. Just wonderful.
Thank you for coming. I genuinely appreciate that. Ms. Lipton, where to start with you? Usually, I like to talk a little bit about my guests' early life, family, education, career path, whatever. But I've been affected by your book, and that's the purpose of a book, right? To affect people with its liberating call to change. And given the fact that there's an element of mystery in the book about you and your life, and given the interweaving of the lives of both the author and the subject, we won't do that. We'll start some other way, which I think will be better. Let's start with your subject, Victorine Morin, who was the Olympia model in Manet's famous painting.
Exactly.
Talk about her a little bit.
Well, Victorine Morin, as you say, is best known for her face and her body in Manet's Olympia. And she was painted by Manet 8 other times, always, I think, in a very mesmerizing way. She always looks out of the canvas in the same way, directly, unflirtatiously, never coy, nor does she demur, is she shy. That is, she never seems to follow scenarios that women were supposed to follow then and, alas, are often supposed to follow now. So she's best known as a model. And because of that, there was a series of cliches associated with her, namely that she was also, it was assumed, a prostitute and an alcoholic, because women who were models were working class, and it was assumed by men that that's what they were. Well, it turns out that she was not a prostitute, she was not an alcoholic. She was a woman who occasionally modeled, who also painted, who made a living illustrating, who traveled to America, who exhibited her works in the salons of Paris, and who lived a very long life.
Don't give away everything. Don't give away everything.
Right.
Okay, so the point you're making is that she came down through art history as a model. described by essentially, if not always, by male art critics as the kinds of things you said before: prostitute, working woman, lower class, and alcoholic too. Okay. In all your early years as a student and art historian, that quality in her was not absolutely apparent to you, right? Something happened in 1970 that put a different perspective.
Well, this is how I would put it. I think that when I first saw her, which was probably in the 50s, I was drawn to her, but I didn't know why. And she lingered in my mind for many, many years. And around 1970, I took a closer look. Why I took a closer look is a little hard to say, but I think I would say that because it was her gaze and her assertiveness, her autonomy, that I found so attractive. It was, after all, the beginning of the women's movement.
I was waiting for you to say that, because that was when, as somebody said in one of the reviews, the scales fell from your and our eyes, right? Suddenly, life and women looked different in our eyes.
Indeed. And it was also the time that I met Linda Nochlin, lucky for me, the great feminist art historian Linda Nochlin. And I began to take seriously that these paintings of this woman fascinated me. And in fact, I wrote a piece in the mid-70s about the paintings of her, but I didn't know I was writing about her. The article was about Manet. It took me another 15 years to realize that it was Victorine Meurent who so fascinated me and not Manet.
That is an incredible awareness. What an amazing thing. Okay, so 15 years later brings us to 1985.
87 to be precise.
87? You didn't go to Paris in 85?
I go to Paris a lot, but I went in 87 for 6 months to do research.
Oh, to do research. Okay. So we want to talk about Paris in a minute. After you did the research and all that, you wrote what every critic, and your book has been reviewed from East Coast to West Coast and plentifully, and almost, I would say, invariably affirmatively, impressively affirmatively, most especially in the more scholarly journals like The Nation, and what was that other one where Lucy Lepard wrote?
The Women's Review of Books.
The Women's Review of Books. Those were wonderful reviews, but we're not going to talk about them yet. We want to talk first about the form of the book, about which, as I said, every reviewer commented. What is different and unusual about your form? I must quote Alex Kate Shulman, somebody that you admire greatly, and she called your book an adroit, unconventional narrative, defying the boundaries between self and subject, between history and fiction, between passionate involvement and cool pursuit.
Well, the form of the book that is so striking to people is what I call a mixture of art history, fiction, and autobiography. And it grew very organically. I didn't set out to write a book that had a peculiar form. I set out as a serious art historian to write about a working class model. But I found that I wanted to say things about her that weren't completely legitimized by the historic record.
The facts.
Yeah, the so-called facts. And I just found at a certain moment of frustration and also probably elation, I found that I was just writing in her voice. And at first I wasn't going to use it. And I read those passages to my husband, sort of jokingly. My husband's a painter. Ken Aptekar is his name.
Say it again.
Ken Aptekar is his name. When I read them to him jokingly, he said, "Eunice, this is fantastic." And I said, "Oh, you must be joking." So he said, "No, I think you should use this in the book." And I began to take it seriously. Plus, it was great fun to write. I cannot tell you how much more fun this book was to write than my academic books were.
Which are so prescribed, circumscribed,
yes,
dry.
Well, I hope they're not dry. I've always written books so that my mother, who is just high school educated but smart, a bookkeeper all her life, could understand. So I've always tried to write in a way
Interestingly.
Yes.
But nevertheless, in a circumscribed vein and in a circumscribed
format.
Well, what I always thought was the difference between my old writing and this writing is that the old writing, I would figure out an argument and what I wanted to say, and I would say it. I would take my knowledge and put it into the sentences. But this writing now, I feel that I learn from the writing. I never learned from the writing when I was an academic, and that's why I love this kind of writing.
That's a wonderful way to look at it. Because the other way, you are declaiming, in a way, from a
Exactly.
position of knowledge
And
and
authority.
experience and authority.
Right.
And here you're feeling your way. In fact, and several of the reviews noted this, and I did very strongly, that there was this great identification between you and your subject. Freud would probably say, projection, projection.
Yes, well, and he
Yes.
would be right. I mean, I think that scholars, as well as writers, always write about themselves and write about their dearest and deepest interests. And there's no question that I used Victorine Meurent to find myself. Now, I don't feel guilty about that because she used me. Everyone knows who she is, and they didn't before. And now I've become a writer as opposed to an art historian.
So you served her well, and she
yes,
served you
exactly.
well.
But to address the
Wonderful.
question of projection, I mean, what I did was I let myself project because I knew I needed her. I needed to imagine myself through her. And
Because what did you see in her that seems
Well,
desirable to
what
you?
I saw in her was that face of hers. Maybe we could show people
Yes,
what
let's.
the face looks like, because it's so mesmerizing, really. Whether you see her in this, the well-known picture of Olympia, which is also on the cover of the book, I'm happy to say.
World famous, that painting.
This one, if you look at her face, just if you can't forget about her naked
Here,
body.
help them see her face.
Yeah, this is what the face actually looks like up
Hold it.
close.
Wait, no. There.
Okay? But in all the paintings that Manet made of her, she looks like that. Here, too, her face, she stares out.
Excuse me, hold that a minute while you get a chance to look at it. That's the famous Déjeuner sur l'herbe
Right, right.
by Manet, which also created a sensation. And what's interesting there, everybody is fully clothed except Victorine.
Well, what's interesting for me is that it doesn't matter that she's naked. She's just looking at you with tremendous confidence. And then I really
Right.
love this one. And I think of this one as being Victorine in drag. And it does turn out that Victorine was a lesbian, so it's kind of interesting that she's dressed like this.
was perceived there.
But
Did we
You
get
got it?
that? Did we get it? Okay.
But you ask me, why her? It's that look of hers. It's that look of authority and confidence. And somewhere, even though I was an accomplished 20th century professional, I felt she had a certain confidence and authority I didn't have. And I think that's why I decided, not consciously, I decided, I'm going to write about this woman.
And it gave you permission, in a way, then, to examine yourself and alter yourself.
I didn't know it would, but it did. It took me on quite a wonderful trip.
Now, one of the things that comes out so superbly in the book, and it's very relevant at the moment that we're talking about Freud, right, was your childhood familial patterns, which were less than wonderful. Mm-hmm. Would you mind sharing that with my audience? It's in the book.
Yeah, I know, it's in the book. I had a troubled childhood because my mother left me when I was 3. And she was also an abusive parent. I hated her. I hated her.
Excuse me, you remember her leaving you at 3? Exactly how did that happen?
She took me up to the Catskills to stay with my father's parents. She said that she had to work in his store. That turns out not to have been altogether the case. And she just left me there when I was 3 and a half. And she said to me afterwards, when we talked about it, she said, she came back to see me a year later, and I didn't want to kiss her. I didn't want to touch her. And she told me many years later that I never did touch her again. And I think it's the child's unforgiving heart. I couldn't, I guess, trust her in some way. In any
What a
case,
scarring experience.
well, it's a dreadful experience, just
Oh.
dreadful. And it caused my mother and me many, many, many years of anguish, which frankly only this book has resolved. Because although the book is very hard on my mother and describes many of the awful ways she behaved towards me, what happened is that because of a friend who's a psychologist and who has a grown daughter of her own, one day she said to me, this friend, she said, you know, Eunice, however much your mother was unkind to you and however much you need to still hate her, something you should remember is that all our mothers were once 18. And when she said that to me, I felt like, for the first time in my life, I imagined my mother's life before me.
Wonderful.
And in order
insight.
to, and because I imagined her before me, I was able to forgive her.
Because you understood the trials and pressures of her
I
life.
began
in
to
a way.
imagine what her dreams might have been. Maybe she didn't want to have children any more than I wanted to have children. But she had to. That's the life she had to have.
And to stay with them more or less.
Yeah.
With her case, a little less. It's fascinating that you say that. I don't want to take any of your time, but I just want to mention a few months ago I interviewed a woman, black, powerful woman, filmmaker, who left her child, gave her child away when the kid was 4. And the way she did it is she dropped her off at an orphanage and left, said to the kid, go to the bathroom. When she came back, the mother was gone.
Wow.
And 27 years later, because the mother had left a little paper trail, they reunited. The film was on Channel 13 and won first place at the...
You don't know her name?
I do.
Oh,
I'm going to
good.
say her name. Won first place at the Sundance, the Robert Redford Sundance Film Festival. Her name was Camille Billops. It hasn't yet been aired because it was done a few...
Oh, yes, I know Camille.
You know Camille.
I mean, I know her work.
And the name of the movie is Finding Krista.
Yes.
And it's like a very similar pattern. I never knew any mothers who left their children. I knew mothers who were less than loving and kind and maybe even a little abusive, but I never knew any that just left. Okay, now talk about your father a little bit, which helps also to understand your mother.
Well, my father was a very seductive man who was a very unsatisfied man in his life. He came here when he was about 12 years old, and he had come from a upper middle class family, a Jewish family in Riga. And when he came here, they became working class people like so many refugees.
Reduced in a way.
Yeah, he felt reduced. And yes, reduced. He loved me the way many fathers, I think, love sons. And he loved my mind even when I was a child. And we read books together, and we did all sorts of wonderful things together. And this was, of course, at the expense of my mother. They had a terrible relationship, and he was very abusive to her and rude to her. And my brother and I imitated him. I mean, we were really cruel to her, about which I have some guilt.
Pain, yeah.
But because she abandoned me, it's a complicated question, which I
Yeah.
try to deal with in the book.
Very, very complex and very wonderfully perceived. And you told me a wonderful thing about your mother's reception of the book. Tell us very quickly.
Well,
You
my
were a little
mother-
worried, right?
I was worried. I was worried, and I tried to prepare her for the book. And she came to hear me read at New York Public Library when the book came out. And I read some very rough passages about her. And
Excuse me, Eunice, we glossed over some of the terrible things that she did, and we won't mention it on the screen because it's something you need to read about in the ensuing years of the bad relationship, really horrendous, and you told everything.
I didn't tell everything.
Maybe, oh God, there was worse. Well, what you told was
There'll
a
be-
lot.
Yes.
So what did your mother say?
Anyway, the day after she called me, and she said, well, Eunice, she said, I cried a lot, but I was very proud of you.
So that speaks wonderfully well for your mother,
Yeah, it does.
because the book is something to be very proud of. And I thought to myself, it's dangerous to know a writer like you, right?
true.
Because everything is
That's
grist
right.
for the creative will.
I tell people that now, be careful. I use everything. But every writer does.
Every writer does.
Every
right?
writer does.
Right. And every writer is always writing about herself. Okay, so your father, to his credit, not financially so much, but attitudinally, sent you to college, right?
No, he didn't send
He
me
didn't
to
send you.
college.
You
I
went
went
to
City
City
College. It was free.
Yeah, but he didn't send you to work either. See, I always appreciate the fact that my father wanted me to go to college. I don't know, because I was like
It was different.
20 years earlier.
Yeah.
And most of the girls I knew didn't go to college.
No, but in the late 50s, if you
Girls
were,
were
you know,
good
even
students.
lower middle class, you went to college.
So you went to City College. We're not going to talk about that, but it was a wonderful and horrible experience,
Well, it was the 50s.
right?
It was the 50s. It was a very, very dreary, intense time. And if you came from a Jewish leftist home, it was even worse because everybody was frightened. People were terrorized by the
It
Holocaust.
was the
Then they were
decade of silence, right?
Right, and then there was McCarthy. And we just fell into our books. And on the one hand, it was, I suppose, awful because we didn't fall into politics, which our parents had. But it was wonderful because we devoured books. I mean, we were so starved, in part because the world outside was so dreary. You know?
Amazing. So you were vicariously getting Paris and art and all those
Well, my father had,
wonderful
yes, and my
riches.
father had given me that.
And you also met Linda Nochlin, and you mentioned her name. You want to give her one
No, I
quick...
mentioned Linda 10 years later.
Oh, not while... Oh, it was after.
Right. I mentioned Linda just at the beginning of the women's movement.
She being a very feminist, outspoken
yes,
art
she
critic,
was.
right?
She
Art
was.
historian.
Thank God I met her. I mean, thank God I met her. She just, you know, I would talk and she would say, write that up, Eunice. And I'd say, write that up? No one ever told me to write anything, you know?
You're just a girl.
Exactly. No, Linda was.
And what was
is
that wonderful question she asked?
I don't know which one you had in mind.
About,
her
why-
article.
yes.
Oh, she wrote a great article in 1971. She published it, and it's called "Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists?"
Profound insight, because no one ever thought about it before.
Well,
right?
nobody would admit it. What was great about it is that she said there haven't been any great women artists, and the reason is, for the same reason there haven't been great women doctors, lawyers, scientists, etc. Women were forbidden to study
Right.
art, to study medicine, etc.
Right, and the underlying message to all little girls was follow the stereotypic pattern that your mothers follow, that women always, and that makes the world a very comfortable place for the men who run it.
Actually, you know, in that way, I was lucky that however troubled my relationship was with my mother, the fact is she worked all her life as a bookkeeper. So she was a model for me in that way, too.
That she was
That she worked
a working
all
woman.
the time.
All right, your mother is coming clearer and better, and I think that's nice, being a mother myself. Okay, so you then got to be a teacher, right?
Professor.
You're a professor, and you taught in college, and you taught art history, and then you wrote about Manet and realized that it was Victorine who in fact intrigued you. Oh, by the way, tell us about the etymology of her name and yours. I love that.
I learned that only at the end of this book that, well, my name is a Greek name, despite my Jewish background, and the name Eunice is in Greek Evnike, which means happy victory. Happy victory, so Victorine, you know.
Oh, so there
Yeah.
was some kind of a celestial chemistry
I hope
at work
not.
there.
But maybe.
Maybe. Well, something drew you together that was wonderful for her.
Her eyes.
Wonderful for her eyes, and wonderful for you.
Thank
Your
you.
eyes, in the broader sense of what you have come to see,
Thank
both
you.
inside and out. Okay, I don't want us to pass the wonderful sense of Paris that comes through in your book. You were there 6 months, but it's as if you had lived a life there. The details, the richness, the texture of Parisian life, places, cafes, people, was just thrilling to me. Plus, all the research places that you described so powerfully. And I saw all those buildings from the outside. I never went in. And I think I ought to tell you that you mentioned in one of the wonderful, sensuous, beautiful moments in the book, a happy dinner that you and your husband, was he your husband then?
Yes.
You were already married. Went to at Jamin.
All right.
And I had never heard of Jamin, and I was sort of impressed that I'd been to La Serre, but I never heard of Jamin. This very morning in the New York Times, there's a discussion of French restaurants and trends in restauranting and so on, and they mention the fabulous 3-star Jamin, to which I said, oh, I heard of that place, I must tell Eunice. Okay, so life in Paris was, in a way, happy and rewarding and pleasant. The research was difficult, often frustrating, but ultimately evaluate that research. What did it
Oh, it was.
What did it do for you?
It changed my life.
Changed your
life.
life.
It absolutely changed my life.
Changed her life. Sitting there on that book and
That's
changed
right.
your life.
Made her visible. Oh, it changed my life. I mean, searching for her in all the various places that I searched for her made me somehow ruminate about my own life in a way I never had before, although I'd been to Paris many, many times. And when I went home after that trip, I, in fact, quit my 10-year job.
What courage that took.
Didn't feel
Right.
courageous. It felt necessary. I
Felt
wanted to be a
necessary.
writer. I didn't want to be a professor anymore. 23 years of opening my mouth and talking was enough for me.
Now you wanted to write it all down
Yeah.
unto eternity. What Milton calls in his Paradise Lost, that talent which twere death to hide, pushing at him as it pushed at you. So even though you didn't think of it as courageous, you nevertheless made a courageous step, right? Because what did you do? Now you have to make a living, right?
Yes,
Writers
but
don't make big livings.
That's certainly true. I make much, much less money than I did as a professor. But I think of it as more of a desiring, a step about desire, not about courage.
Isn't that the subtitle of the book? Alias Olympia?
Yes,
A
it is.
tale, say it?
Let's see, Alias Olympia, a woman's search for Manet's notorious model and her own desire.
And her own desire. Desire in the sense of desire of life,
In every sense, in the libidinous, in Freud's libidinous sense of every sense, desire of the senses, desire of the mind, desire for life, appetite. You know, somebody pointed out to me that one of the leitmotifs of the book is walking in Paris and in
Yes.
New York, and I think that especially for a woman, walking alone has delicious overtones because it's been so hard in our lives mostly to walk alone in the streets and not feel vulnerable.
in fact, one of the great ballads of our time, you'll never walk alone.
Well, you might want to walk
You
alone.
might want to walk alone. Yes, I think that's true. So as Alex Schulman, of whom we already spoke, said, out of this detective story, art history, autobiography book, two artists emerge. Victorine, who turns out not only to have been a model but an artist, and Eunice Lipton. And what a wonderful, wonderful artist you are.
Oh,
in
thank
the
you.
literary
Thank you so
mode.
much. Thank
Eunice
you.
Lipton, your book was a thrilling experience to me.
Oh.
Second only to the experience of sitting here and holding your hand and listening to your wonderful illumination of the experience of writing this book.
Well, thank you, Florence.
I thank you, Eunice Lipton, author, for being here. Writer. I should say writer. Writer sounds better. Writer. And I thank you, dear audience, for being there. I hope you have shared my pleasure in getting to know this incredibly meaningful, wonderful woman, and I hope you will also get to read the book, Alias Olympia. You will be much rewarded for the experience. Thank you for being there. Thank you for being here. This is Florence Rapoport saying good night this night. Wrap it up, they said. So I look forward to seeing you on our next night.